Welcome to AngelNV. This is the third year that we're running the AngelNV program, and it is a two-part program. The first part is the part that you are in now, which is the Entrepreneur Bootcamp part. And then in January, we will start with the investors. This part is the education for entrepreneurs, and we teach people what it is that angels are looking for to invest in a startup. And then at the end of this, you'll decide whether you want to apply for our angel cohort, which will start in January and then end at the end of April. At the end, there will be at least a $200,000 investment from the angels. This is a training program for the angels as well. So when they start in January, they're going to learn how to do due diligence. And each angel comes in with $5,000. And we look for at least 40 of them. So we will have a $200,000 pool to invest in one Nevada-based company. As it turns out, in the last two sessions that we've done this, we've raised more than $200,000. So we were able to invest in more than one company. And now with the SSBCI matching funds, the $200,000 will turn into a $400,000 investment. And if we have extra money that we're able to invest in a second or third company, that investment will be matched also. So tonight we have John Emmons and John Laurie, and they're going to talk about business model strategies. So let me tell you a little bit about John Emmons. He began his career as a San Francisco Bay Area teacher. And after 8 years in the public sector, not just teaching, but also building after-school programs spanning 25 school locations and creating a continuation school for expelled middle school students, John went on to the tech sector. He's generated over $500 million in gross revenue across several businesses and industries, including apparel, technology, and e-commerce. John has over a decade of experience developing business-to-business and business-to-consumer channels, often from scratch. John is a thought leader and has a track record of creating meaningful and successful teams. His passion for the education space comes from his family of several teachers, his wife, a third grade teacher, and his background in education. Now, John is no stranger to schools either, John Laurie. He's an experienced startup founder, go-to-market strategist, investor relations specialist, and startup advisor. He has a PhD, so he's spent plenty of time in school. At his core, he's a problem solver who delivers tailored solutions that lead to successful outcomes for his clients. Much of his work is built on understanding why people do what they do, and then using analytics and predictive modeling to develop strategies that achieve long-term success. John's work regularly creates value for startups in the areas of strategic planning, organization design and change, and analytics to action. So here are John and John, and they're going to be speaking on business model strategies. Take it away, gents.
So we're Project Wilbur. We've been doing technology startups for a very long time. Started Project Wilbur after Cafe Press went IPO. That was where I headed up business development. So I know a lot about apparel and e-commerce. So feel free to ask questions after this. Probably I know more than I ever wanted to know. Maggie did a great job of giving us intros. Collectively, Project Wilbur has raised about $50 million today. So for other companies, about 29 of them so far. So we have a pretty good track record. We kind of know what we're talking about. And we're happy to dialogue about that. Our expertise falls under these three main pillars with three subcategories per pillar. Really focused on making sure that your company has what it needs to succeed. So we're here to talk about your idea, right? And what a plan, and how to take your idea from idea stage to a business plan, right? And then that business plan is really built for you to have a recipe, if you will, as you bake your cake. And then in turn, take that to be able to pass due diligence. Which is really what we're all here for, is to raise capital to make your idea real, right? So what do you need? Well, a good business plan has 10 parts. You really got to break it down to the team, why us, like the executive summary. It's usually a collection of resumes. You want to go through your company description, what you do, your go-to-market strategy, how you get to where you need to go, industry analysis, what industry you're jumping into, why are you jumping into it, all those fun questions, market analysis, so you can break down the forever, TAM, SAM, SOM, product and services. What is your product? What are your services? Competitive analysis, who can jump into your space, who can do it immediately, who's already in your space. All those things need to be ready to go right off the bat. Your management, org structure, make sure that you have that well planned out. You're not going to get money without it. Financial projections. Why am I giving you money? If I give you money, how are you going to spend it? And then funding needs. How much do you need? For how long? What's the runway? So let's break them down. Executive summary. When you apply for a job or anybody applies to work for you, you look at the resume. You go through and you fully understand, like, all right, who's this person? What can they do? What's their skill set? Why them? Right? So you need to break that down. What's your education? Are you School of Hard Knocks or did you go to Harvard? Right? Why does that matter? Why are you the right team? What makes you the specific group that is going to take this thing to market and have it be successful? You have to have those answers. It is the most important reason why somebody's going to write you a check. So company description. This is by far the most important thing next to team. What is the problem that you're solving, right? Can I relate to that problem? Or is it something that's only in your head that nobody else can understand? You need to clearly articulate what that problem is. If you're articulating that problem well, someone else is going to feel it. They're going to be like, oh yeah, that sucks. Because if you don't have that, you miss the problem. The solution needs to be something that everybody can understand. You want to be able to explain this to your 70-year-old grandmother and have her go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I totally get it, right? Because if you don't do that, what's going to happen is when you pitch a VC or you pitch an angel investor or you pitch your grandma, they're going to be like, I don't get what you do. So it's super important. And then you also have to point out why you stand out, which comes back to the executive team, possibly, that they are ahead of the game, that you guys have something that sets you guys apart. That really matters. Want to add anything?
Sure. So make sure when you go through the problem solution part that it's a problem that somebody cares about. When I say somebody, I mean lots of somebodies who are willing to pay you to solve that problem. One of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make is they find something really cool that they want to tackle, and they're one of like 3 people in the whole universe that care about that problem. And if you 3 people is not going to make you money, and a VC is not going to write you a check. So make sure it's something that somebody has an issue with, and there's a lot of those somebodies. And make sure that solution is well articulated, like John said, that your grandmother could understand it. And in that way, if you can lead people from point A to point B to point C very clearly, it makes it a lot easier to connect with them and a lot easier for them to get on your side.
So you've now communicated your problem. You've communicated your solution. You talked about your team, which are probably the 3 most important things in a pitch. But how are you going to go to market? How are you going to figure out how you're going to get customers? How are you going to communicate that? You should have a comprehensive analysis as to how you're going to do it. When you break down, like you should have just a page on how you're going to go out to market, how you're going to figure out product market fit, how you're going to go through and understand what the estimated costs are, what the unit economics are based on that entire space. You're going to have to understand what a CAC is. Raise your hand if you know what a CAC is. Okay, CAC stands for customer acquisition cost. Okay, so you have to know that. You're going to get asked that by 90% of the investors that you talk to, right? Does anybody know what an LTV is? Lifetime value. Right, lifetime value. So what we're talking about right now is how much does it cost you to get a customer and how long will that customer stay with you, right? Specifically for SaaS products, software as a service, this is the most important metric that almost any investor is going to care about. So industry knowledge. I'm going to tackle this one. I'm talking about.
Sure. So industry knowledge, we've got 4 bullet points here. Identify leaders in the space. So who are these people? What are they doing? What are you doing that might be similar to them? You know, are you building off of what they're doing? Are you going some new different direction? Why is that important? Where's this headed? One of the biggest things about industry is if I'm going to invest in something, I want to know that has a future. Would anybody invest in Polaroid cameras right now? No, probably not, right? That's old tech, not very many are sold, and nobody's going to give you money for that, right? So when we do an industry analysis, it's really about taking the health of that industry. Where's it going? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it flat? It's okay if it's flat, right? If you've got something that's groundbreaking, you've got some new solution or some niche you can exploit, perfectly fine. You don't have to have an industry that goes straight up. What investors don't want to see is an industry that's failing, unless you've got something earth-shattering that's amazing and you're like, look, I'm going to turn this whole thing on its head and we're going to flip this around and we're going to go to the moon. Okay, you know, then we can have a conversation about that. You know, so what are the competitors doing? You have a specific competitor section that's not industry. You kind of want to outline who the big players are. Maybe if the industry is fragmented, if it's not fragmented, is it someplace that's dominated by 2 or 3 players that take up 80% of the market? Okay, that's going to be tough to break into. Is it pretty fragmented where maybe the top 10 players have 20% of the market? Okay, that's a little more interesting. There's a lot more room to maneuver, work around in there, and maybe your solutions are going to be better accepted. And then where's the industry growing? Is it growing now but not going to grow 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Is it predicted to steadily climb? What is it? It's really just a thing of, you know, I want to make sure that I'm getting into something that has long-term potential for my solution, is really what it's about. And what I would do is always do your best to justify things with data. So if you can't prove it with data, then it doesn't exist. I like to use a lot of government-based sources because they're hard to argue with. Census has some amazing data files that you can use. They used to have one that was spectacular called American Fact Finder. Of course, it worked really well, so they got rid of it last year. They change how they do things about every 6 months. So it doesn't always make sense. It's not intuitive, but once you get into it, it's not just population, it's business, it's, you know, every particular thing you could think of, from money to poverty to people to, you know, everything. Other great sources are BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics. Run a little differently, but a lot of great data sets. If you're looking for what I'm going to do in my industry or what's going on in my industry, a lot of this data goes back 10, 20, 30 years. So if you can use that and make a case for what you're doing, it makes your case that much stronger. If you're getting stuff from like, hey, I saw a blog in Fortune magazine or Entrepreneur magazine, not compelling. If you've got government data from 10 or 20 or 30 years, much, much more compelling.
Right. One other thing, there is a source here in town called the Small Business Development Center. So they have access to a bunch of this stuff. The UNLV has one. So you should definitely utilize those sources because they're free. Free matters.
And part of this is really just showing people you've done your homework. You've thought it through. You've checked out the angles. It's a lot better than writing on the back of a napkin.
So this piggybacks on that because this is your market analysis, right? So what's the total addressable market? Do you guys know what TAM Sam saw on this? Anybody heard that before? Anybody not heard that before? Okay, so it's totally cool. So total addressable market is your TAM, right? So that's if usually you'll hear a pitch where someone will say, the entire market's $45 billion. And if I just get 10% of that, we're $1 billion company. Don't ever say that. It's the worst thing to say. It's bad, okay? Because then you haven't given like a true breakdown as to what you think you can capture, right? So total addressable market's super good to know. Then you've got your serviceable addressable market. So serviceable addressable market is where you're a specific niche you can play in. Like for example, like social media. So probably $1 trillion market, I don't know off the top of my head. Actually, let's do something I know off the top of my head. Home improvement, I just did this deck. So home improvement, remodeling, do-it-yourselfers, whatnot, it's $475 billion market, right? It's owned mainly by one player, Home Depot, right? Home Depot has, I think, 60% of the market. Lowe's has 20% of the market, some sort of split like that. I can't remember the exact split. But what's important to note there is you're not going to unseat them, right? So right there, you cut that off, right? So your serviceable addressable market is everything that doesn't include them, and then whatever is in the space of like the wholesalers, cut them out, right? Which might be another $100 billion. So now you're in a space of like maybe $20 to $30 billion. Well, that space is your operatable market, your addressable market, and then whatever you operatable is what you think you can capture, or attainable market, right? You'll hear operatable and you'll hear attainable. Both of those are interchangeable. It's either what you can attain within a certain period of time or what you think you can operate in. So that's your ceiling, if you will, right? Everybody follow so far? Awesome.
Yeah, so those are the three big points under market analysis.
Mhm.
First thing, I like to get a little more granular with things. Somebody wants to know, who's your customer. Market really refers to people, right? Industry refers more to revenue. So,
Right.
if somebody says, who's your customer? What I hear a lot is, well, I've got an app, so it's everybody with a cell phone.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not, right? So what do we do? Well, I'd like to start backwards. Figure out what your perfect customer looks like, because that's going to be your core. And then list all of their attributes, and then go back to standardized sources like the census and see if you can start doing some math. And, even when you get technology-based products like apps or things like that, it's really easy to say, well, in the United States, there's 370 million people, and X number use phones, and so many live here and do this. Typically, I like to pick 3 to 5 markets and dive really deep and say, hey, we're going to launch in the following markets over the next 3 years. Here's how many of our core customers live there, and here's how much of that is actually, part of the SOM. And we hit it like that.
We have a question from online from Jessica. What's the difference between SAM and SOM?
So SAM is your serviceable addressable market, which means I play in this, that's my playground. That's where I can live, etc. Serviceable, operatable, or attainable, depending on who you're talking to, is where you can capture what you think you can capture of said market, right? So that's the difference. So hopefully that answers her question, or his question. Who was it?
Jessica.
Jessica, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks.
Yeah. So products and services. So we're here because you have a product or service idea, right? So we went through all of that, and now we're at what you do, right? So you really have to break this out. This is going to be a couple of pages of your business plan. It should be 1 or maybe 2 slides of your pitch deck, right? So when you go through like how it works, who your suppliers are, how you're going to address whatever demand that you have, you need to make sure that you break all that out so that it's very clear. Things that investors are really going to care about. Obviously, we've covered go-to-market, we've covered a lot of the different key points, but unit economics, I buy a thing for this, I tweak it for this much, and then I resell it for this. So I got my margin broken out. It's super duper clear, right? Really matters. IP, they're going to care because they're going to see that there's competitors. So if you have intellectual property or IP, you want to be able to say, hey, we're defensible because of XYZ reason. We have a patent, we have secret sauce, we have industry secrets. They can't copy us because it took us 6 years to get to this point with 4 developers. Like whatever the reason, make there be a reason. Because if there's not, if it's just like, oh, well, I bought it from China and nobody knows about it, so I'm first to market, that's kind of a reason, but that's defensible for like 3 to 6 months. So just keep all of that in mind when you're going down this path. Oh, and longevity. I didn't talk about that. How long is your product going to last? Because if it's like going to break after the 3rd time someone uses it, you're not investing. So you have to make sure that there's something there that makes sense for your product to scale, right? Example, and this is my favorite one, Pet Rock. Anybody old enough to remember the Pet Rock?
Yeah. Okay,
so do you guys know how that happened? Anybody? Okay, this is a great story. Guy buys a warehouse in LA. It's filled with river stones. He doesn't know what to do with them. So he ends up painting little faces on them and selling them for $3. River stones cost him 10, 15 cents. It was a flash in the pan thing. As soon as he got out of stones, he rented out the warehouse and he was done. And it created an entire movement, and a bunch of people got on the bandwagon. But it went from like a $3 to $5 selling point because he was first to market. But then anybody could jump into that. I remember my PE teacher when I was a kid gave me a pet rock. She did it in her backyard. She had a bunch of river rocks, right? There's no barrier to entry for them, right? But it worked for a window. Window was over. So just keep that in mind when you're putting this together.
Yeah, don't be afraid to go into some detail about your product. People want to know what you've got. A lot of entrepreneurs get hesitant. Well, you know, I don't want to tell people because they might steal my idea. The reality is they're probably not going to steal your idea. In fact, I've never met an investor or anybody else that said that's the best idea in the world and then took off and did it on their own. You know, chances are you have way more expertise in the thing that you're doing. And investors are a different animal. They're looking for things to invest in, not stuff to steal or stuff to operate on their own, right? You guys are the operators. They're the engine behind it. So if you get to a thing where you don't have IP, it's not the end of the world. Just explain how you're going to mitigate that. How are you going to get around the fact that other people can copy what you do? That's part of your plan, right?
Sure, but address that. So that right there, what you're talking about is like, this is a disposable product, right? Right. Okay, so you're redefining an industry with your specific disposable product, possibly. Like, for example, there's a water bottle that's made out of seaweed, right? I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it dissolves in your mouth, right? For context, you shouldn't know about all this stuff. I get pitched stuff all the time, right? So when I got pitched this, I thought it was super interesting. It was like 5 years ago. The seaweed ball is a replacement for a water bottle, so it's disposable, right? So redefining an industry has longevity because maybe there's a piece of IP around that process. So it doesn't have to be the product's long. It's that there's a 25 or 20-year life cycle of patent, right? So now you've got longevity there. So you have to be able to define your story to meet the narrative of what the investor is currently looking for, which we'll cover later in the demo. Of the seaweed ball?
Question was out of curiosity, what is the shelf life of the seaweed ball?
Yeah, I don't think it's super duper long, but the salt in your saliva is what helped break it down.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that is why it was like stackable and reusable. It wasn't reusable. They're fillable and they're sealed. I don't remember all the details, but I do know that it hasn't fully taken off yet for the reason that the shelf life's not super long. Yeah.
Not a question, but just I wanted to add an excellent place to find government data. It's called FRED, F-R-E-D. It's the Federal Reserve Economics Department of the St. Louis branch of the Fed. They've got dozens of PhD economists doing all kinds of studies. And if you ask questions on particular products and services, etc., they'll send you government data on what it's about because their whole role is to help businesses grow.
It's awesome.
Yeah, if you Google them, everything that you can download from there is free.
You have a question? Awesome. All right, so moving on. So competition. So we talked about competition a couple of times already. There's so many different parts of competition. So there's people that will say, nobody does what I do. I don't have any competition. You'll hear that a lot. When you go to pitch competition, you'll hear that all the time. Fine, but always fall back on, look, nobody does what we do right now, but here's the 3-4 companies that can jump into what we're doing immediately. And here's how we're different, right? That's a good way to address that you're different, but note that you thought about this. You need to think about this. It's super important. It's important for your business plan, pitch deck, like basically everything that has to do with your company. You need to constantly be evaluated, right? So like, for example, in the apparel space, right? For e-commerce. If you were to ask me 10 years ago, would eBay be a competitor to Cafe Press, Redbubble, Teespring, or any of the other players in that space? I would have said at that time, no, but they could be because they have the users and the creative personnel to do that, right? And today they are. And Etsy was a blink at the time, And now they're probably the largest t-shirt design manufacturer currently. Because they create more content. And if you would ask me about Amazon, I would have said no. They could, but they're not. And now Amazon prints more print-on-demand shirts than any other company in the entire world, collectively. So anybody could jump into whatever industry you're talking about. As soon as the number is big enough, the big players will start looking at it. So you need to be ready to answer those questions. You need to be prepared to how you're going to answer those questions. You need to be able to defend your point of view.
Yeah, it's perfectly okay to jump into a space where you've got some big competitors and acknowledge that, like John said. What I like to do is typically write a little synopsis of my competitors. Crunchbase is a great place to start looking companies up. You know, who's their executive team? Where are they located? How many rounds of funding have they had? You know, what are they getting into? You know, news articles about them. Their own websites are great, because people always want to say, this is what I've got, this is what I'm doing. Okay, great. That's a great source for you to check out, in their own words, what they're into. So, like John said, acknowledge that. The big danger is that, yeah, I've got no competition. That's kind of a big red flag. So avoid that at all costs. Just, you know, if you've got people that are way bigger than you, like, look, I haven't even started yet, but it's okay, right? Because where we're going, this is who we're going to run into. Here are barriers, and this is how we're going to overcome this. And that's always the key. It's okay to say we're deficient, because as a startup you are in many respects, but the fallback is always, this is my plan of how I'm going to overcome, right? The plan might not always work, and it might change, certainly will, always change, but this is what I'm thinking about. And then the last thing I'll say about competition is sometimes it's really helpful to step back and think about who your competition really is. So about a decade ago, I was a mentor at an accelerator, and the company's name escapes me, but a couple of guys from the Bay Area had a great idea. They were going to do a really advanced dashboard for lawyers to manage their business practices, their clients, everything, sort of like Rocket Lawyer, but, you know, a dashboard that was way, way better. And they had 2 or 3 competitors that they had profiled quite heavily. And I listened to their pitch a couple of times, and at one point they said to me, you know what, our biggest problem is we can't get these damn lawyers to stop using a yellow legal pad and pen. And I said, okay, who's your competition? And they started listing, and I said, no, say what you just said. They said yellow legal pad and pen. Like, that's your competition. Figure out how to get them to stop using the yellow legal pad and pen. That's ubiquitous for lawyers. Hey, let's grab 10 boxes of yellow legal pads and 10 boxes of red and black pens, right? When you figure that out, right, that's your competition. So sometimes it helps to look at it from a different angle.
Right. The other thing to keep in mind, this is actually a good opportunity not to show who's against you, but to show an opportunity. Your competitors got funding, whoever you're listing at some point got funding, and at some point they got exits, right? So you could point out like, oh yeah, XYZ company raised $100 million over a 10-year period. We're going to unseat them because of this, this, and this, and their return for their investors was X. Most of that information, at least for the further along companies, is public. You'll be able to then better showcase and mitigate the risk of investing in you. So it's a good data point. Management organization. Okay, so you're building a company. You're probably a team of 1, maybe a team of 2, because you have a co-founder, right? Maybe that's it, because you're super early stage. You have to plan for what you're going to need, because at some point you're going to be more than 2. You're going to need a sales department, marketing department, HR department, all of that. You need to start outlining what that's going to look like. You need to start thinking about what the mission statement is for your company, right? Are you guys going to be, and then you're going to hear this from some investors, are you a missionary or a mercenary? Are you in it to make as much money as possible and sell the company? Or do you want to change the world, right? This is where you put that together. You need to have that statement ready to go. You need to have your org chart, like we're going to raise money because we're going to build out these departments. That's all super important as you're starting to craft your business plan and how you're going to move that forward. Want to add anything to that? Or I think we're good. Yeah. Okay, financial modeling. This is pretty much how you get money. So you've mitigated the risk. They believe in your problem. They believe in your solution. They believe that you have the right sort of IP. You've addressed pretty much every concern they're going to have. They like your resumes, everything's good. So now you're at the financial model. Okay, rule of thumb, do 3 years. You need to start with whatever you're going to do over the next 3 years. It's a 36-month plan. You always want to have that in. To get to a hockey stick, you have to think about who you're reaching out to, right? If you're just doing friends and family, you don't need all this, right? If you're just doing angels, sorry, anyway, you're just doing angels. What's important is that they might care about your like emotional connection to this, less so than the monetary return. If you're doing venture, like this is all about knowing your audience. If you're doing a venture capital pitch, they're going to want to know how you're going to get them a 10x return in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's like just rule of thumb, like know who your audience is, know how you're pitching. We're going to cover that also more in just a few minutes. But a good rule of thumb is you want to make sure that half whatever you're raising is going towards operations, right? You're going to do some product market fit testing. That's PMF, right? Super important. Does anybody know what product market fit is? Okay, we got one. Let me break it down for you super simple. So product market fit is where your product fits a specific niche market where it grows organically through word of mouth. Like this is very specific, right? Where you're solving a real problem where other people are like, oh God, did you, like LinkedIn came out. Hey, my Rolodex, I left it at my last job. Well, now that's not a problem anymore. LinkedIn is that solution, right? Facebook, I don't know how to talk to my grandma anymore. I don't connect with her. I want to send her pictures, but God, it's like 40 grand a year just to send pictures of my toddler, right? How do you solve these problems? These are solutions to set problems, right? 40 grand is probably an exaggeration, but you guys get the gist, right? So ideally, you want to make sure that you're addressing that. Always have a legal budget built into this. Rule of thumb is 10%. It could be 5. It could be 15. It depends on what you're doing. If you're filing a bunch of patents, it's going to be higher. If you're making sure that your company exists, that's a whole nother bucket. Marketing, we address, that could be part of your product market fit. But you do want to make sure that you get a brand message, you have a brand book, you make sure that you're on brand with what you're doing. And there's always going to be consultants. And this is just a rough model. There's a bunch of other ones specific to industries that are more important. So know your industry, know where you need to spend money, know how you need to break it out. You have a question?
One from Jeffrey. Why plan for 2 years in the red and rule of thumb?
So, good question. So it depends on who you're raising from. Rule of thumb on the being in the red for 2 years. It's just true. A lot of people say, well, if I just get 200K, we're going to make $10 million over the next 5 years, right? Super cool that you think that. It almost never happens that way. I mean, I can't think of one that happened that way. Can you think of one? No. So, I mean, I've been a part of teams we've raised $20 million and we were like, oh, cool. Like our Series A was 20, we're going to blow it up. And then we had to deal with like a legal fiasco that had to happen because we were changing how everybody does things because startups are about disruption, right? So there's things that you're not going to expect to happen that are going to happen. So maybe you don't present it this way. I would recommend that you do, but you need to make sure that you are aware that you're probably going to lose money for 2 years. It depends on the company, it depends on the product, but a good rule of thumb is that it's 2 years. That was one question. What's your other question?
Jessica has 2 questions.
Okay.
Should marketing be a lot higher for a D2C brand heavy product? And is this table based on use of funds or the company's total expenses?
Okay, so very good questions. First, B2B is more labor intensive. And you do need to hire salespeople, enterprise salespeople, et cetera. That whole process costs time and money. Usually your CEO is going to be your lead salesperson at first, and then hopefully build out a sales department. It should cost you less to start that process than a B2C, where a B2B, the brand is less important than on a B2C, where, by the way, B2B is business to business, brand, B2C is business to consumer.
The question was D2C. Sorry.
Direct to consumer, it's the same thing. Sorry, I apologize.
Sorry.
So B2C and D2C are the same thing. So when you're selling direct to consumer, you have to plan on losing money for the first 3 months because you're going to be figuring out the market. So the cost is higher in the first 3 months, and then the cost should plan out after the next 3 months because you're You're basically adjusting your product market. Your business is this is an example. So yes, it would be more for that structure. I played in both spaces. I can tell you that usually two sales guys can help you figure out the B2B or business to business market, whereas direct to consumer, you need a marketing team. You need to know ad spend. Your customer acquisition cost is way more important at the initial dollar spend because you're buying ads. You're going through like how you're going to market via social. You're going through how you're going to market on whatever platform you're marketing to, where your audience is, where your market is. So it's much more costly. So that person is very correct. What was the other question I had? They had another one. That was it. All right, sweet. I tend to talk a lot, so I apologize. All right, so the investment. This is most likely why everybody comes to these things, right? You guys want to know how to raise money. You need to figure out how you're raising money. So there's convertible notes or convertible debt, which could be a safe document or a convertible note. Difference, anybody know the difference between the two things? No? Okay, cool. I'll explain. Super simple. Safe document, no interest. Convertible note is interest. They could be post money, meaning that it's valued after whatever the valuation is after you raise, or pre-money, which is the valuation before you raise. Okay, does everybody follow what I just said? Yeah? I see some nodding, so I'm gonna go with yes. Equity. Here's a question. Yeah, sorry, go.
I wanted to ask which one is better for the founder, before or after?
Safe note, pre-money safe note is better, right? So do you want me to say what the question was?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the question was what is better, before or after for the founder? A pre-money safe note is the best way for a founder to raise money. There's no interest. It's hard to collect on the debt. It protects the founder more than it does the investor. It's also specific to geographic areas. So just so you guys know, if you want to raise in a safe document, raising in Vegas will be hard. The Bay Area, Los Angeles, Seattle, parts of Chicago, New York, maybe North Carolina are the only places where people are going to go like, oh yeah, cool, safe document, let me sign, right? Everybody else is going to be okay with the convertible note, right? Convertible note is debt. It converts at usually a timeline where it's like 2 years out and 2 to 3 years out, or there's trigger events, right? Safe documents also have trigger events. A trigger event is I raised X number of dollars. I hit this much revenue. Our P&L is X, right? So like there's different trigger events that will lead to that becoming equity because they convert to equity. A convertible note usually has an interest rate. Usually the standard is somewhere between 8 and 10%. But with the economy right now, you might get weirdness right now if we've seen weirdness. So just be aware of that. Okay, so equity. So let's talk about equity for a second. When you raise money via equity, it's a price round. What does that mean? It's a taxable event. It can be a taxable event depending on how you raise it. It starts coughing up your thing that you have very little of. You have 100 points of equity. Break down the basis points, whatever that is, however you want to break it down, you can. But you have 100 points. You don't have more. You can't make more. It doesn't there's not like an equity farm where you can go and get some more equity, right? So you want to be very sparingly. You want to make sure that if you raise in convertible debt, that there's an out where the next investor could buy them out or some other solution. And so you have points to negotiate out when you raise. And yes.
The world or what?
Value to change the world?
Yes.
Okay. It's usually based on historical data within the space. So if let's use EdTech for an example. Nearpod exited for $650 million, which was a reading app to help kids learn how to read, and had a bunch of stories and went through that process. So if you're a reading app, you would be looking at their users, how many users they have, what their valuation would be, what their IP was, how you compare to them, and all of that before you go and say, my company's valuation is X, right? If you have 100,000 users, what would that turn into, right? If you're pre-money, I recommend that you only do debt. convertible note or safe document because you have no traction, you have nothing, and you're hoping somebody prays with you and believes in you and gets you down that road. But that's my 2 bits. Any questions on this? Yes. So debt, you're talking about debt financing.
Yes.
Okay, so debt financing is the final tier here, is the best way to raise money, right? So, but my recommendation is if well, let me rephrase. So what are some factors that matter when you're doing debt financing? Debt financing, you usually need to have 2 years of active P&L revenue coming in before you can go to any bank and raise capital. Most of the time it's 3 years, right? So if you do an SBA loan that's backed or something like that, you can do startup funding, but you usually have to collateralize that, which means you put your house up or you put your whatever net worth high thing that you have to back said loan and plan on losing that thing if you're not going to exit. Right, because they want to see that you have skin in the game. If they're going to give you some capital. Is everybody following so far? Okay, cool. Questions on that?
My question was a scenario about a few years ago when I was on a job search. Before accepting a role, I asked a few of my founder, CEO friends about 2 offers that I had. They looked at the financial backing for both of them. One of them was the debt funding, and they said, don't accept it because it's risky. So I guess I'm trying to figure out why, how they came to that conclusion and what that means for our entrepreneurs.
Sure. So it's a really good question. Scenarios that are in my head, and you might have others. So if I'm a first-time founder and I have a $5 million house, and I have a co-founder, and I'm putting up $1 million of my house as collateral. I'm not taking expertise. I'm not like showing that I'm coachable from an angel investor or a VC, right? So you're in it with me and no one else, right? So the value of a VC or an accelerator or startup NV or a group of investors in general is that you're not alone and they've been through probably everything you're going to go through, or at least one of them has. And they can give you pointers, advice, etc. Right? So your risk that you're talking about, if I was advising you as a friend, I would say that would be the risk. I probably would have outlined the risk so you'd know.
Oh, people are laid off money or they.
Yeah, so that's the thing, because when you're self-funding something as just debt financing, you're the only one that's likely to make sure that it succeeds. So if you have a group of people that are motivated to make sure that it succeeds, the likelihood of success goes up. You're mitigating said investment risk, right? Or employment risk, et cetera. Also, one key question, if you guys do end up not just starting your own company, but go and apply for a job, always ask this question if it's a startup, what is your runway? Because if the answer is, well, we're raising right now, so like 6 months, well, don't go work. That's, a scary place to be. And having been born and raised in the Bay Area, I can tell you, there's a number of times I've been called into an interview room and I ask that question and everybody looks at me like, I don't want to tell you. I'm like, well, I don't want the job then, right? So just be aware like that matters, and it's going to matter to people that you hire, right? So, also risk of employment means you might have to sacrifice more employment equity. So just think about that.
A lot of this is situational.
Yeah.
So the right answer, but also the answer you don't want to hear is it depends, right? I think there's a lot of ways that you can do it. I mean, those are 3. I think the debt, if you have physical products, if you have inventory,
Right.
And you're just starting out, you can sometimes get companies to give you the inventory, with an APR attached to it that you have to pay that back in 30, 60, or 90 days, right? But once you demonstrate that you're a good credit risk as a business, then a lot of times they will give that to you interest-free. So it's like getting an interest-free loan. You got all the inventory, assuming you sell it,
Right.
You make money, you pay them back. So that's a way of debt financing if you've got physical products that you ship and sell or just sell. I think, as always with everything, the devil's in the details. Right. Equity, I mean, you can structure deals any number of ways with equity or safe notes or almost anything. I think, and I don't want to go too long on this because we could talk about the investment slide for the next 5 hours.
Yep.
And we don't have that time. But I think the worst position you can put yourself in as a founder is if you get money, and that's not a bad position. That's a great position. And, you make some mistakes and you run out of money and you've got to go back to your investors. The danger isn't in them saying, no, we're cutting you off. The danger is in them recognizing, wow, they've got something really good here. Maybe they just, they screwed up, or they, have a couple of team members that maybe shouldn't be there. Sure, we'll give you more money, but for a lot more of your equity. So now that's your choice, right? So be aware of things like that. But like John and I can speak with you all afterwards. I don't want to take up all of our time on the investment slide. But
Right. So we added a couple of slides just because we do this all the time. So this is about just be aware of like pitching, going out to market, and like what to expect. So you pitched 100 VCs, right? Know that like 25 might turn into a meeting. And the breakdowns here on the slide pretty clear. 10 will maybe get additional vetting. And that's if you've met all the previous criteria, right? That's clear and easy to understand. 5 might go into due diligence. 2 might go into term sheets, maybe. But you have to pitch a lot. I know people that have pitched 1,000 different VCs and just to raise their first $2 million. And it took 1.5 years, right? So just keep that in mind. Know your audience. So when you go through pitching, well, let's go through this. You need a professional deck. Use the rulers on the pitch deck. It's like so easy. This is a Google slide deck right here. So I built this on the Google slide deck like a while ago. There's rulers on it. It's super easy to make sure everything's aligned. Have a graphic artist, pay for the clip art, et cetera. Make sure you have a data room. And then you need them because you need to look professional. Why would somebody give you money if you don't have everything put together, right? I mean, you haven't spent the time to make sure you're showcasing yourself well. Why on earth should they give you the time about whether they should give you money or give you feedback, right? Which leads to this main key point, know the investor. I mentioned this a couple of times earlier, know your audience. This goes for sales, this goes for your customer, this definitely goes for the investor, right? Know who you're talking to. Because who you're talking to matters. How you talk to them matters. What you're showing them matters. So you want to make sure that you have their personal info. You do like this is all biz dev stuff, but our business development stuff. But you want to dive into who they are as a person, what they care about. Maybe they're into like green waste. They want to focus on public speaking. They care about politics. Like whatever it is, make sure that you're aware of it. So when you go into the meeting, you're not just staring at each other waiting for a response. Yes. Yeah, data room. So data room would consist of, when you build a data room, you want your deck in there. You want all of the IP, financial modeling, contracts that you have, resumes for the entire team. You want this digital. I recommend password protected. There's lots of sites that do this. When you go through and your business plan should be, which is the whole reason why I'm talking. But when you go through all of that, you want to make sure that it's as crisp and clean as possible. Don't throw a bunch of stuff in there. Make sure it's super organized and don't just like throw a whole bunch of things with no weird, like all sorts of weird naming titles and whatnot. You want to make sure it's as crystal clear as possible. So again, your 70-year-old grandmother could go in there and be like, oh, I get it, right? Because you want to make sure it's crystal. Did that answer your question? So data room will consist of your pitch deck, your business plan, any IP that you have, intellectual property, like if there's a patent or a formula or something like trade secret, etc. All your financial modelings. If you're in business, you should have your P&Ls, balance sheet. What am I missing? I feel like I'm missing something. I think you did. I did? All right, well, that's exciting. Yes. It's a great question.
Great question.
So, so the average number of slides per deck. So if you go over 20, it's too many. We have a different opinion on appendixes. But really you should keep a slide deck down to 10, right? Yeah, 10 to 12, maybe 15, but you want to keep it simple. You want to be able to do your whole pitch in 10 minutes if you're doing a pitch. This is longer because I wanted to make sure you guys had a bit of knowledge about how to raise and what to deal with. But slide decks in general, I like to have an appendix Because I like to let the investor know that I thought about a bunch of different objections they're going to have, right? But my pitch is always 12 slides, maybe 14, no matter what I'm pitching, right? So then I add an appendix for all the objections I'm going to get, any weird, cool contracts that I want to showcase, any cool IP that I want to show. If I want to break the product down to 15 slides, because I know I'm going to get those questions, those go in the appendix. Because you want to make sure that you get the point across quickly. And then you can point to, well, I thought about the thing that you're saying, because I'm going to point to it four slides into the appendix. You had another question? No. So the question is, how many slides in the appendix? I personally don't think there's a limit to how many slides there should be in the appendix. John doesn't believe there should be an appendix. He's like, if you can't get your point across in 12 slides, then you have failed in your presentation. I don't disagree with that. That's a true statement. I'm lazy. I want to make sure that I have every objection ready to go, right? John, on the other hand, who's very smart at this, would redesign the deck for each person he pitches to, which way smarter and way more work, and I'm really lazy. So that's why.
Yeah, John, I think, there's not necessarily a wrong answer. John and I have different perspectives on it.
Right.
For me, the 12 slides and all the things that John wants to put in the appendix, for me, that is what I want to speak to an investor about, right? What I want is those things to be the follow-up conversation. All right, let's have a talk about this. John just wants to get that out there and show that I know you're going to ask me about this. I have thought about it. Let's use that as a starting point.
Right.
There's not necessarily a wrong answer. There's just a different perspective. Detailed but concise is the way I approach things. Detailed but concise.
Right.
Strip it down to as few words and as few sentences as you can while still getting the point across.
So we have one question online. Is the purpose of the deck to get the vetting stage?
Yeah, so the purpose of every presentation, every pitch deck is to get another meeting or to get the close, right? So if you're pitching for the first time to a venture capitalist, then your next meeting should be to get to some form of due diligence or at least deal terms. Then you want to be able to, once you get the deal terms, you want to get to the final stages of due diligence and then hopefully a term sheet, right? Because that's what we all are looking for. Right. And it works the same for sales, for hiring somebody. It's all about like, I got a thing. What do you want? So I can make sure I fulfill that need for you. Right. So like this slide is actually a perfect rebuttal and answer to that question, because when you research the right investors, your pitch is so much easier. Like if I'm pitching, I don't know, blockchain to a guy that only invests in aquaponics, that's not going to go anywhere. And it's going to be a huge uphill battle. And they're going to be like, why are you talking to me? Right? That in fact might happen. Where like I've been in rooms where that's happened. I've been on the VC team where that's happened. So you want to make sure that you spend the time researching who you're pitching. It super matters. Yeah, that's a new term I just made.
Easier to do the work on the front end. It's really satisfying. You can find lists of VCs in different places. Really satisfying to put, 50 names in the GMAS, send out your deck. You hit send, you're like, oh, that was great. If they're not aligned, the chances of them getting back to you are probably close to zero. So it's way better to spend that, 30 minutes or an hour researching who might be a good fit for you and just maybe getting to 5. Right.
And a quick follow-up to that, one thing to keep in mind, your competition slide, again, I go back to the competitors all the time. Your competition slide, the competitors that you think are in your space, they got investment from somewhere, right? So you should be looking at who gave them money and who are those investors' competitors, right? Because that's your space. They know your space. Why do you kick ass? They're going to know why. It's going to be super easy to tell that story. Yes. It's a great question. So the question is, do we open unsolicited pitch decks? So yes, every venture capitalist or family office will open unsolicited pitch decks. Why? Because they have a fund and they have to deploy said capital in a period of time. So their job is to spend that money, and nobody wants to be the guy that missed Uber or Airbnb or fill in the blank, right? So they read every pitch deck well, I should say almost every pitch deck. But if you get a referral, you skip the analyst and you go straight to the investment partner usually, right? So yes, a referral is better. That is a fact. But most likely every venture capitalist would read your pitch deck. It might not be the VC, it might be an analyst, but everybody reads pitch decks. And they have a process. And if you don't have a problem, solution, team, how much money you're going to make, what your product is, like all the things that we just talked about, if you don't have, you miss one piece of that criteria, garbage, they skip it. Okay, good rule of thumbs. Well, we do pitch decks, but Sequoia Investment has a great pitch deck model. YC has a great, YC's Y Combinator. Y Combinator has a great like example pitch deck. So I would recommend that you guys take a look at those before crafting your pitch deck or your business plan or any of that, because you're going to have to make sure you hit that criteria. I guarantee you competition, financial model, all the stuff we just talked about is going to be. When is it ideal to seek VC funding? When you have to. Venture capital is designed to do one thing. It is to accelerate you to unicorn status. So you will need to be able to go from where you are now to a $100 million company, right? Plus, right? So the whole goal with the VC is that you're going to become a unicorn at some point, which is a $1 billion company, or a decade unicorn, which is a $10 billion company. So that's their goal for investment. Now, when to go to them? Personally, venture capitalists are sharks. Their whole thing is to get as much equity, somewhere between 20 and 30% usually, or more, every single time you talk to them. So seed, 20%. Series A, 20%. Series B, probably 10 to 15%. Because you've proven yourself, you're less risky, there's less drama, and then et cetera. So it keeps going down as you go up in the alphabet, right? The key thing though, when you're raising and you're an early stage company, is traction. The thing to mitigate all risk for any investor is, why do you have traction? What is your traction? All of that. Now, if you're in an incubator, that means you're an idea. You're turning it into a company. Depends on the incubator. Startup NV is great. They have a great group of professionals.
Yay.
Yeah. I've known Jeff since he started this thing, almost since he started this thing. So it's a great entity, and it's here, and it's the best one that I know of that's here. So I would definitely go down that path. There are other incubators out there. The ones that charge you are wrong. So, and when I say that, I mean the ones that take, 20 to 30K for a session. That's not cool, right? Because they're getting paid they're compensated in equity, right? It's like usually a deferred note or something of that nature. So incubators are super helpful, especially for a solo founder, or even if it's just two co-founders to get the ball rolling. Accelerators are great because the audience that they bring. Incubators too, they're supposed to bring a demo day to get you further investment. Accelerators are supposed to do the same, but it all depends on the deal. There are accelerators out there or incubators out there that take 20% of your company, right? In weird stages so that you lose a big chunk of your company before you've even raised real money. So you got to look at the deal terms. Super important. Do you have a question?
Yes, so I'm sorry. So the question was, going back to markets, if you're going to say, look, I'm going to enter 3 to 5 markets in X period of time, how do you choose those markets to enter? And it's situational. It's always situational. So it could be based on where you're located, could be based on the supply chain if you are dealing with physical products. It could be based on revenue. So if you're doing something in the commercial real estate space, you probably want to start in Florida, because that's the entire state of Florida is like the capital of commercial real estate transactions. So it really just depends on what your product or service is, where you're located, what you need, and where your customers are. Right. So, I mean, again, that's, it depends is a terrible answer, but it's also the right answer. But again, happy to speak afterwards. And if I can add more detail, I will.
Yeah.
We have a question online from Jessica. What might an established 5-year company expect to give up in equity using the example with 400K in sales, increasing 30% over a year, 15,000 customers, consumer goods.
Okay, so we got 400K in sales, 4-year-old company, increasing 30% year over year.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Yes, she said
Okay,
yes.
all right. So is it service or is it products?
Consumer good.
Consumer goods. Okay. Are you making the consumer goods? Like, do you have IP around that, or are you buying it and reselling it?
Patented and bespoke.
Okay. It's hard to give you any sort of valuation without actually looking at all of your P&Ls, but depending on what your growth is, your team, and if you have your customer acquisition cost dialed in and the lifetime value of said customer, it's usually in a 3 to 5x for like a cap, and a cap is what your valuation cap is at. If it's true software where there's no physical product, it's usually somewhere between 6 and 10. If it's ed tech, it ranges even higher. At least it has in the past. It's weird right now because there's recession-ish, but I mean, Nearpod was a 50x multiplier. So it all depends. And then EBITDA is, I mean, for a service industry company, it's like, 1.5, right? So like, I mean, it's all over the map on your multiplier, and how defensible your product is. Also how many users you have. So there's a bunch of different variables. I'd have to know more before giving an accurate number, but I would probably hasten to guess like 3x, right?
Just wondering what a normal percentage of the equity it would.
Oh, the question was about the equity.
Normal to raise, not valuation.
Right, yeah, sorry. So it would be.
Original.
Cool, excellent. So a rule of thumb, 20%. Every investor wants 20% or more. So like plan on giving up at least 20%, depending on what you're raising. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah,
it's like 20, 25, usually right below where they're a manager within the company, but above where they have no value.
Yeah,
Right.
I think bottom line with when raising, like John said, don't take it till you need it, which is true, right? A lot of people won't go for it. Even if we go through that process of, you send out decks to 100 people, it goes all the way down. Even when term sheets are exchanged, one of those two term sheets is going to be accepted. So 50% acceptance after you get all the way through the filter, right? I think John mentioned the word traction before, which I think is important. All of this takes a lot of time, right? So every time you go out and you pitch and you're speaking to people, if you're a solo founder or one of 2 or 3 people, that's time that you're not working on your business, time you're not growing your business, right? So what's the best way to fund your company? Generate revenue. What's the best way to make yourself attractive to investors? Generate revenue.
Yep.
Right. So you have to make a decision at some point. Is the time cost worth it to me?
And how much traction, should you have, or how many sales should you have before you approach a VC or?
So that's a really good question. Depends on your company, depends on what you're selling, depends on, all right, so to answer your question, so that depends on what you're selling, right? So if you're selling airplanes, selling one airplane for $30 million does not mean that you're going to get investment, right? But you have $30 million in revenue, so that's amazing, right? So that's great. Usually you want to hit enough sales to show that there's people that want your product, and that people meaning not 2, but enough to have a good sample size.
Yeah.
Hundreds, depending on the product, thousands. One wheel was, I want to say he sold somewhere near 200, 300 when he first launched, which got him his first VC.
Yeah.
He launched on one of the companies I was at. That's why. Back in the day, I'm old. So, it depends, right? SaaS products, if the purchase price is around, annually, usually between $100, $200 a year, it's a couple thousand to prove that. Good rule of thumb is revenue has gotten you to about $1 million annually, right? That's usually the rule of thumb, right? And then from there, you've hit that number where you're on track to raise with a good multiplier, and you've proven demand on your product. So basically you're at $90K a month That's the threshold. Usually.
It doesn't necessarily have to be revenue. The past 10 years, we've seen data as an asset is a big thing.
Yeah.
The key with that is that it has to be data that somebody cares about.
Yep.
If you collect an enormous amount of data that nobody cares about, you're not going to get funding.
Yeah.
Right. It has to be data that somebody can say, okay, we can do something with this. Right. So again, there's that answer. It depends.
Yeah. Sorry, it's not more definitive.
Sorry. I mean, when you look at what Tony Shea did with Zappos, he went to VCs, I guess, when he couldn't keep up, when he was getting so many orders, he couldn't keep up, and he said, I got business.
Yeah. And proving the demand, like mitigates the risk.
Yeah.
This whole game about fundraising is mitigating the risk, right? Because then that makes people easier to write you a check. Traction is one of the proof points of that.
Sure. And you like the previous slide and this slide kind of speak to that where look, as a startup founder, you're always going to get pushback from VCs and they're always going to tell you you're too early, right? Guess what? Every startup is too early, right? But it's an opportunity, right, to ask for feedback. Like, okay, let's have a conversation about this. Why do you think I'm too early? And let me explain myself, why I don't think that I am, or what advice do you have for me, right? When should I come back to you? What would you like to see? How would you like to see this work differently for me to be more attractive in this?
So the question is, you always hear too early. When is it too late? It's too late when you don't need money because you're successful and no VC can invest, right? So that's like, why would you carve up your company? You would just sell it and that would be an M&A event. So kudos to you if you make it. You're going to hear from every VC, it's too early. I don't get your market. Your niche doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. What's another good one?
I don't see the fit. I don't see the product market fit. I don't see how you're going to generate enough revenue over the next 3 years to make this work. I don't see how you're going to convert users to dollars, that sort of thing.
Or how are you going to keep the users? Great. You got 30 users right now. How are you going to keep them?
Yeah.
Right. There's an objection to everything. Business terms like that are great objections. They're always going to be there. You're never going to overcome them. You need to pry a little deeper. It's always going to be something that falls down to either they don't understand your problem, they don't understand the solution that you're providing, or they don't believe in your team. If you address all three of those, all this other stuff is to support those three buckets, right? So if your problem is something that they understand, there's a niche, it makes sense. Every investor basically raises a fund on a problem. If you want to solve because of this problem, or we believe that this solution is right, or we only invest in people that graduated from Stanford. I remember seeing that on somebody's thing. So everybody has their three things, but it all falls down to those three things: team, problem, solution. Not in that order. I just did it backwards. But you get what I'm saying, right? And you had a question. The question is missionary versus mercenary. As far as investment thesis, for me personally, what do I like to look at? And then what is the percentage breakdown? And then is that it pretty much? Okay, all right. So I usually do very small angel investing when I do angel investing. I'm not doing that now. I vet investments for a number of high net worth individuals. It's part of what we do as a company. So it depends on the audience. Water's really big, and that would be missionary, with mercenary sprinklings, if you will. Excuse the pun. So water, aquaponics, water conservation, everything in that space, water rights. There's a lot of money to be made in water. Water's now going up. We're in Vegas, Lake Mead. Even though we only pull 1% of our water from Lake Mead, it really matters to a lot of people here. So that is something that is, I would say, close to 30% of what I hear now is water. And I would say that would fall into your missionary bucket. Aquaponics, I would put in that bucket as well, food. So a big portion of that. The blockchain stuff, all the crypto, all of that has gone from, 60, 70% of what we're hearing to 20 right now. And that would be there's no value to the world through blockchain. It's a completely not real thing, right? Now the value you could argue would be saving processing, and we can go into detail and go back and forth, but it's not a real thing, right? And it doesn't affect people staying alive or not. water does. So I'd say like, it's been consistently at 30, like in that bucket, which is a huge percentage when you consider all the different things you can invest in and all the different companies that have. That's me. If you want to scan that, you guys can reach out, hit us up. Happy to keep taking questions
Okay,
for a little bit.
questions in the,
How important is the stock option to bring people on board? So there's a thing called total comp. Have you guys heard this before? Raise your hand. Total comp. Sorry. The question is, how important is stock options to bring people on board? Okay, so raise your hand. Have you heard of total comp? Okay, so total comp is a term coined in the Bay Area. I think it was Google. And it was, I'm going to pay you $250K in cash. I'm going to pay you $200K in stock, right? At whatever the value is at the time of your bonus, right? Which is great. And it motivates people to work really hard, which is also great for the company, right? There's also the Amazon vesting model. Anybody know what the Amazon vesting model is? No? Okay, so the Amazon vesting model is you get 10% of your options after the first 12 months. Second one, you get 15%. So that's the second one. The next one is, 25%, and then the rest is at the final year. So they're basically handcuffing you to work there for 4 years, right? Now, granted, this is a very valuable company, so that makes sense. But now a lot of startups have adopted this. I'm not excited about it. So I wouldn't go work for that startup probably, right? Because it's the first 12 months that matter for any early stage startup. Then maybe the next 12 months are super valuable. So I'd want to get as much of my equity to vest in the first 2 years as I possibly could. If it's less than 50%, it's going to be very hard for me to decide to stop doing the things that I'm doing to join. So you have to think about where you are in your company lifespan and what justifies that. But the answer to your question is it's so important. Because if you're going to get people to believe in your company and your brand, and you want them to believe in the solution that you're providing for whatever problem that you've been pitching, then you need to make sure that you have all of that laid out in a way that's going to allow them some financial security to mitigate the risk of them getting underpaid, because most of the time startups underpaid. And that's really what we're talking about here is how little can I pay you to get you to work as hard as possible to get a bigger payout in 2 to 5 years or 10 years from now.
And that's not meant in a malicious way. It's just
Right.
that startups tend to not have a lot of money. So you got to have some sort of compensation, right? So what I would say is get really good at sales, which most entrepreneurs don't have a sales background. Get good at sales. That's your first sale. Hey, I want you to come work with me.
Yep.
Great. What are you going to pay me? I don't have anybody to pay you with.
Right.
Okay, great. What else can you give me? I'm going to give you this stock. Is it worth anything? Well, it says it's worth something on paper, but maybe not. That's your first sale, right? Your first sale is if you've got a business partner, sell your potential business partner on why they should come start something with you and stop doing other stuff that might be making them money. And then your next sale is your first employee. And then after that is your customers. So get good at selling. And that's the best sales job of all. I don't have anything to give you except this piece of paper that says you own part of something, but stop what you're doing and come work for me.
Right. That answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yes.
Online, will you share your deck?
Sure. I could send it to Maggie.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I think Maggie shares the recording on Fridays around noon and attaches the deck to that.
All right. No problem, Maggie. Yes. So he asked, you're going to be in the red for 2 years. How do you showcase that in a financial model? And what do VCs want to see? Right? Okay. So, VCs want to see what's called a hockey stick. So that means that you've got a spike at some point where your sales are going to really go up. But your dependency on them, like every VC is going to tell you you're dependent. They're not going to tell you this. This is what the fact is. They want you dependent on them to keep raising. So they're going to keep getting a slice of equity. It's just that's how the business model works, right? So they get 20%, then they get another 10 because they bring other investors in, and then they get another 5 because they bring more investors in, and they lead a couple of rounds, and it's because they want you to grow as fast as you can. So you're going to hire salespeople with a high base, so they're going to move really hard and work really hard. You're going to do giant booths at CES or whatever trade shows your industry, and you're going to be dependent on that incoming capital, right? Because they want to stay with you for like 2 to 3 rounds. And they're going to then hopefully exit when a hedge fund comes in and wants to take you public, and they're going to buy out some of the previous investors or previous angel investors. So the goal here for them is they're going to want to see a nice hockey stick, and then they're going to expect you to lose money ongoing. And there's companies that, like, you know, Twitter didn't even start making money until 2 years after they were public, I think. Snapchat still loses money.
So John, on that one slide,
Yeah.
where you had 50%, I think it was operational, and
Yep.
10% legal, and 20%. Would it be in those areas, or would it be? Would you say that in the red would look to be in one of those areas?
Yeah. So operations is salaries, right? So you want that to be reasonable, where people aren't eating ramen, but you don't want it to be $250K for the CEO. Okay. Your question was, what areas should be the ones that bring you to the red, right?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. All of them, but not one specific. Should be spread out. Operations, like, you don't want like 10 salary people bringing you down into the red when you raise $10 million, right? So you want to spread it out so it's even. But you, like, raising money is because you have a problem that you're trying to solve, and you want to experiment as you go to hit the product market fit for the said space, right? So if you're doing marketing to address a certain niche because you think that there's a space for that, you want to have a whole plan around doing like 15 niches and doing, like, I've allocated $1 million to do these niches, and a team and operations and a whole division for that thing. Right? So you want to break it down that way. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Online question from Jessica. Is it common for an angel to invest in a new company making a loss still? What would be their considerations for a direct to consumer company?
First thing, every angel investor wants to know what they get. So their first question will be, you're raising $1 million. What do I get for said $1 million? That's where you see people like Mr. Wonderful on the Shark Tank say, all right, I want a royalty for every dollar that I put in back. And then after that, I'll drop to X percentage, right? You'll hear stories like that from angels. Or not stories, you'll hear requests, asks. You'll also hear, you know, debt financing. Once they get paid back, they'll get some sort of drop down in equity or something. Like, there's a bunch of different structures that you're going to hear. Most angels, or most investors in general, for a B2C company are going to really want to know your CAC, your customer acquisition cost, and how, like, if I give you $1 million, if you know that it's going to cost you $400 to get this customer that's going to spend $2,000 with you, I want to know, one, what's the real margin on the 2,000? Because if your operating expenses and everything else are not put into that. So if you're raising capital for your B2C company, your CAC is really going to matter. Your true margin is going to matter. So true margin is, I've taken out all the depreciation, all the overhead, all the personnel. So it's not just I spent $7 to get this guy that spends $20. So I didn't make $13. Because I've got $7 per person or per sale of overhead in there, right? So now it's 7 plus 7, and now you're at $6 of profit, maybe, right? And then there's taxes, so you got to figure out the taxes on that too, right? Because you're e-commerce, you're B2C, so you got to figure out the taxes on that. So that's all, like, you got to figure out that number, not that I spent $7 and I spent $7 to get the customer. I sold it for 20. You got to break all that down. And then that's your true value. So they want to see all that. It's going to matter. I'm constantly poking holes, and so John pokes more holes than I do. I'm usually more about the team. John's more about the numbers. So that's usually how we break down.
I got one more question.
Please.
And I just want to get your opinion on these business models in terms of which ones you guys may think would be more appealing to the angels and the VCs. A subscription-based model, a transaction, which would be like Uber, or an ad revenue model like Facebook or Google. And I think I'm missing one other model, but
Yeah.
those,
So I don't know what the business is. Subscription is always the best if you can pull it off. Ad-based revenue is almost a two-sided marketplace. You need to have the eyeballs to be able to sell to the businesses that want to market. And then what was the other model that you asked?
transaction like a Uber or Lyft, they're just gonna they're gonna put people together, they're gonna take a percentage of it.
It's also two-sided marketplace, right? So two-sided marketplaces are the hardest things to raise for unless you have one side of the market, right? So I would do things in stages if it was me. You're not asking, I mean, maybe you're asking me, but I'm like, as far as like what business model is the best model, if you're starting from zero, subscription's the best to start with, right? Because you build the audience. And I would recommend a freemium with an upsell option for whatever it is. Then once you have enough users, so critical mass, then you go into the two-sided marketplace options that you have access to. Once you get to that point, you have your two-sided marketplace, then you can start talking about the other things you're talking about. And I would do ads last because ads like get people to leave platforms. So that's what I would recommend.
So before we end today, our next session is November 1st. And it is Faye Mishan speaking on Tam Samsung. Thank you everybody online for attending. Thank you everybody here for attending.
Don't miss the first. Faye's amazing. So she's great. So Faye's.
Thanks.
Bye, Maggie. Tell Jeff I said
Bye.
hi.